The finish line is in sight for Ontario's political parties as we round into the last few days of the Ontario election campaign. Which way will the province go? Hello and welcome to Unpublished TV. I'm Ed Hand. Boring, bland, blah have been the descriptors of this campaign. Not a lot of fireworks on the trail, but around it, well, severe storms raked the southern and eastern part of this province, still leaving thousands in the dark. Factor in sky-high prices for everything, a war in Eastern Europe, and another school shooting in the U.S., and the electorate could be forgiven for being distracted from this election. When the writ dropped, the Ford PCs were in the lead and in majority territory. They haven't relinquished much of it since. Our unpublished.vote question asked you, what do you think will be the outcome of the Ontario election? 56% predict a PC majority, 20.5% a PC minority, 7% predict a Liberal minority, 4% an NDP minority, and other went to 12%. However you're watching and listening to our show, whether through our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, or podcast channels, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more, I'd like to remind you, you can still cast your vote on this topic at unpublished.vote and then email your MP to tell them why. Joining us to discuss the campaign and where Ontario may turn, I'm pleased to be joined by Andrew Enns, Executive Vice President at Leger 360, Marvin Ryder, Associate Professor at the DeGroote School of Business at McMaster University, Tasha Carradine is a Principal at Navigator, and Stephanie Chouinard, Assistant Professor, Political Science at Queen's University. And Andrew, considering we're coming out of the biggest health crisis in generations, how did the electorate seem to forget about the challenges of the last 2 years?
Well, I think one thing you have to keep in mind is that everybody's really focused on the road ahead. The last 2 years have not been good years. You're right, but I do think, and we're seeing it in our polling, people want to hear about how it's going to get better. What's the plan? What's the plan out of this, as opposed to dwelling on we should have done this better, we should have done that better. So I think that's in part what's contributing to people. And to some respect, Doug Ford's resiliency on the campaign trail on some pretty relentless attacks on his pandemic record.
In terms of the resiliency, can you give me an example?
Well, I think his the ballot number, for one. Our last polling had him at 38%. 3 points shy of what the 41% that got him elected in 2018. And I think, quite frankly, with the splits the way they're shaping up, he could end up doing better with a few less points on popular vote. And I think his favorables. Doug Ford's always been a bit of a divisive figure in Ontario politics. I mean, lots of people really think he's a fantastic guy. Lots of people think he's the devil incarnate. But the reality, those numbers are still kind of holding as we get into this campaign. His favorables are still strong enough that he can go into a crowd and find some friendly faces.
Tasha, the PCs are seeing support among those red Tory Liberals. Is that a reflection of the policies or a reflection of their leader?
Oh, I think it's both. I think that, Stephen Del Duca has still not managed to really define himself and his campaign. The Liberals really didn't have a specific focus. They are actually on the same side as the NDP on a lot of issues, things like rent control, getting rid of the 413, they privatizing or ending private home care for seniors, for example, or healthcare for seniors, for example. Like it's kind of, there's no standout. There's no breakout thing. And some of the gimmicks, like, $1 for a ride on the TTC that he put forward sort of echoed Doug Ford's buck of beer from the last time. So a bit of almost a copycat there. So I think that, yes, there's a reflection that the Liberals haven't really put forward an agenda that's really caught fire with their supporters. I think there's also the fear, perhaps, by some of those blue Liberals that you mentioned that there could be some kind of coalition. And I think they could thank Mr. Trudeau for that because of the deal he struck with the NDP on the federal scene. So people are maybe concerned about that provincially, that if the Tories have a minority, that could be the situation here.
Marvin, it appears the PCs are cruising toward a second majority, or is there something there that can trip them up before the vote on the second?
Ed, I have a favorite expression. He who never says anything can never say anything wrong. And what Doug Ford is basically doing is just showing up for photo opportunities, but not talking. And he's made that the same policy for all of his candidates. Now, I'm speaking to you from the Hamilton area, and we've had a series of televised debates for local ridings. Not once has a Tory candidate shown up for one of those debates because they can't say anything. They can't say anything wrong and get anyone upset. And it seems to be working. You'd mentioned earlier about sort of the general apathy. I think most people don't want to re-legislate the last couple of years. They want to put that in the rearview mirror. So they are a little more interested in the future, but I don't think they feel that Ontario policies have that much influence on them one way or the other. So we've not found an issue in the future to differentiate the teams. Therefore, I'm not sure he's going to get as big a numbers. I'll trust Andrew on his polling with that. But I certainly think it's going to be a majority. And the real race is who's number two.
Stephanie, the new conservative parties that have appeared, New Blue, Ontario Party, Populist Party of Ontario, are they a threat to the PC majority?
I don't think so, quite frankly. There was a bit of a concern in some rural ridings, particularly. We know that the PPC federally had shared their member lists with some of these new parties, and in some ridings, trying to get them some supplementary momentum. But what we're seeing in the polls right now is that both of these parties might not even make a blip in several ridings. So I think Mr. Ford can sleep soundly that these two new parties are not going to threaten his candidates, generally speaking.
Andrew, voter turnout was pretty solid in 2018. You expect a repeat, and if not, which party benefits?
Well, solid. It's still not terrific numbers in 2018. I think it was 56%, and you'd like to think there'd be a more engaged population. I suspect voter turnout actually could be below that. I mean, the last couple of elections, 2014 and the one before that, they were actually quite low. They were closer to 50%. So we could see something below 55% in this election. And I think, quite frankly, that helps the PCs and Premier Ford. I think older voters are historically more likely to get out and vote, and the PCs currently pull strong with that older voter. I think also remains to be seen. We've got some data coming out tomorrow in a poll to see what kind of advanced polling numbers and whether one party did better. But PCs historically and usually governments in general tend to have good, strong ground games. So low turnout, then suddenly it's up to your ground game to get out your support, and that might favor the PCs as well.
Tasha, is it surprising a number of labor unions are lining up with the PCs? They're not really known to be hanging out with organized labor.
Yeah, they're not. The labor unions in question, of course, are private sector labor unions, and it's been a coup, definitely, for the progressive conservatives to have them on side. They sort of put a lie to, like you said, the dominance that the left has been able to claim in terms of union representation. Now, the major unions, major public sector unions, of course, still not in the conservative camp, but I think that it is significant. I think it speaks to the focus this government's put on the trades. It's also, it shifted position in terms of protecting workers and the worker protections and sick days and that sort of thing, which it did pivot to in the latter stage of the pandemic after torpedoing original legislation that had been on the books by the Liberals for that same purpose. So I think that, it speaks, it's clever politics, but it's also the right thing to do. I think that, the party, if it wants to grow and if it wants to represent all Ontarians, it does need to connect with workers in all sectors. And so I think Mr. Ford, he's also, I think, a very relatable politician. He is, he's a populist himself. Let's be clear about that too. He has that populist touch, and I think that has also helped him connect with different groups in the province, and he's worked that for this election very effectively.
Well, I can see where a lot of them would line up when I guess the key of the platform is a $10 billion basic construction project.
Yep.
So it's not really that much of a surprise.
No, I don't think it's a surprise. I mean, infrastructure, and I mean, it is something that the Tories have championed here. Doug Ford's also talked about the Ring of Fire and the need for developing the north of Ontario. I mean, endless ads on the radio about creating those high value jobs. Even saying that it's people who shower at the end of the day, not in the morning, that built this province. Taking a bit of a swipe at the elites. We're seeing that in the federal Conservative race as well. So I think that, the Conservative Party here, the difference is they haven't fallen into the negative stuff. It's been more touting the positive aspects of those kinds of projects and those kinds of jobs and the need to build. And again, it's the sense of optimism that Ford manages to convey. And I think people are hungry for that after the pandemic. I think it helps them actually that the timing of this election is very helpful in terms of it's the summer. And if people are now thinking, or almost the summer, they want to just forget about the pandemic and move forward.
Now, Marvin, you're in Hamilton, and this is Andrea Horvath's fourth campaign. If she doesn't win, is this party looking for a new leader?
Yes. Short answer, yes. You can only do this for so many times. Now, she's the opposition leader at the moment. I believe it was 39 seats at dissolution. I think she'll be lucky to crack 30. So first, her seat count will go down. I think it's possible she'll lose the opposition leader status. In other words, I think the Liberals may gain enough to do it. That's the real question. I could even see a tie, each of them with maybe about 24 seats. And then I don't know who becomes opposition leader if the two parties are tied. But if her count goes down and she doesn't seem to move forward, yes, this would be the end of Andrea Horvath for sure.
Stephen Del Duca, if he doesn't win his seat, is he done?
That's a great question. We've seen leaders be given more than one kick at the can and to have some time away from the legislature. We can think of Jagmeet Singh, for example, who was not an elected MP for a couple of years as head of the NDP. I'm not sure the Liberal Party of Ontario has that much time for Stephen Del Duca, however. One question is, if not Stephen Del Duca, then who, right? Who would be willing to step up and replace him, especially in a time where, it's very clear that the Liberal Party is still rebuilding. We're not expecting them in any way, shape, or form to perform fantastically on June 2nd right now. So there might be some sharp elbows for sure if Mr. Del Duca does not manage to pick up his seat from Michael Tibolo, but I think the jury's still out on that one.
Andrew, we talked about, and Marvin brought this up about being stage managed, the PCs. They won't answer questions. They don't scrum. Protesters have been roughed up at a couple of events. Does that not factor in for the electorate?
It really depends on the mood of the electorate, Ed. I mean, if you get into a situation where there's a real appetite for change, and there's some real hard questions and some hard focus on the government and the government record, then that approach to sort of duck and bob and weave, that becomes problematic. I think in this election, and a number of your guests have touched on it, there hasn't been that galvanizing issue. The government record, it wasn't great in the pandemic, but I also, from earlier research that we've done, there's a large segment of the population that while they complain about the job Ontario did in the pandemic, they also kind of grudgingly say, not sure anybody else did much better. And so it's a bit of a wash. And I think Tasha said it best. People really want to focus on what's going on in the future. Quite frankly, the timing is really good. People want to get into summer. Get into summer, get the election behind them. And I think in that sense, they're not really thirsty for a bunch of government, PC blood on the table. And so the fact that they can dodge a few debates, I think it's also a testament to the fact that, or evidence to the fact that the other opposition leaders haven't managed. Andrea Horvath has a problem. It's her fourth go. And I think there's a lot of just, I've seen this story and record before, and I'm not that interested. And Stephen Del Duca, again, one of your guests said it, hasn't quite connected strongly with the public. And so no one's asking those hard questions that the public wants to follow up on.
Tasha, it's been interesting leading up to the election campaign. Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau did not seem to get along very well during the pandemic. And then the last few couple of weeks, maybe a month or so, then there's a couple of joint announcements, and is he become a better politician? Is he sort of, why are the two of them getting along so well?
Well, there's a sense sometimes, and we hear this in Canadian politics, that if you've got a conservative government at one level of, at the provincial level, it works. There's a federal government that's liberal. They play off each other. In this case, though, you're seeing a bit of cooperation, interestingly enough. And the childcare thing, I think, was a big one. Doug Ford knows that there is an appetite, definitely, especially, here in Toronto, where I'm sitting, you've got costs of childcare topping $20,000 a year for parents. So there's, anything he can bring them to say, hey, look, I'm going to help with that. And again, there are conservatives who take a very different view of how childcare should be managed and how it should be, parental choice, for example, instead of perhaps funding spaces, and that kind of debate can be had. But the point is, Ford's popularity, I think we said it earlier, it cuts across political lines too. He's trying to broaden that appeal, and he's broadening it to groups that maybe traditionally would not have looked at the party, such as the labor unions, working class, and also, trying to see what they could do in the cities. If there's enough of a split, the odds of them winning the riding I'm sitting in, Toronto Centre, probably pretty slim. I guess the Conservative candidate doesn't want to hear that. But to the point Marvin made earlier, there's been no debates here either that she's been attending. The Conservatives have been playing it really safe. So, there could be some surprises. And I think that cooperating with Trudeau is one way of saying that, or getting a deal is to say, look, I'm a leader who can get things done. That's the motto of this campaign for the Tories, right? Is to get things done. And if he can do that with a Liberal, then what could he do if there was a Tory, I guess, in power is the message. He's the leader who gets stuff done no matter who else he has to deal with.
Ed, can I chip in on that
sure.
a second? There's a famous cover of Maclean's magazine in which there were a series of Tory leaders, provincial leaders, the federal leader. This was the new wave of conservatism. And you can take a black marker and start crossing out faces there. One of the few people on that cover is still standing is Doug Ford. And I think the lesson from Doug Ford is if you just are too antagonistic towards Ottawa, you're not going to get the money, you're not going to get the goodies. And God knows over the last 2 years, there have been a ton of goodies from the federal government helping at the provincial level, cash flowing in a way it's never flowed before and may continue to flow. Mr. Trudeau has said that whenever the pandemic is declared over, he wants to talk some more about healthcare funding, which is a big chunk of everybody's budget. So if you see Jason Kenney die, if you see Andrew Scheer die, pivoting a little bit and maybe not loving Justin Trudeau, but embracing some of the things that he's prepared to do and fund and bring that money to your province, I don't think this is such a crazy thing.
Following up on that, as Stephanie, is, Doug Ford's success something that, the Jason Kenneys, Scott Moe's should be maybe taking a look at?
There's been quite a few pieces in the last week about that, and the comparison between Jason Kenney, who was a little bit more dogmatic, refused in a sense to follow, science science does not need parentheses, but was not willing to stick to guidelines. We all remember Best Summer Ever and what a bust that was, King September in Alberta, obviously, and Doug Ford, who was more keen on listening to experts and was relying a little bit more on expert advice in order to guide where Ontario was going with respect to COVID-19. Obviously, he didn't do that perfectly. No government did, I think, in the Federation. And we all remember in March when things started to open up in Ontario, everyone saw that strategy loud and clear. We saw the election coming. We all knew that Mr. Ford did not want COVID-19 to be in people's minds come June 2nd. That could have had a boomerang effect if we were right now in the middle of a crisis such as, the one that Newfoundland and Labrador saw last year during their provincial election that hurt Andrew Furey quite a lot at the polls. So that did not happen. So that strategy very much paid off. We also need to be cognizant, however, that the progressive conservative base in Ontario is not quite like what Jason Kenney was looking at in Alberta. It's very important to understand that ideologically, there's a little bit of daylight between those two bases. And we're seeing that happening right now with the follow-up of Jason Kenney's stepping down. We all remember Jason Kenney saying, "I'm the one holding the crazies back," essentially. And, we're seeing reports now that Brian Jean, one of the contenders for the UCP leader, threatened to beat up another one of the candidates, and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's entirely fair to Jason Kenney to say, well, you should have just done what Doug Ford did, because I'm not sure that would have played as well as it did in Ontario.
If I can jump in
Sure.
for a second too, I think that there's something definitely to that, because studies that we've done at Navigator in terms of satisfaction on pandemic management show Albertans are the least satisfied with the management of the pandemic. And ironically, they had the most, liberal or disregarding of the science, I'll say, regulations in the country. So how far did they want them to go? Even further than that, I guess, in terms of a lack of regulation on things like masking and vaccines and others. So the populace there, Stephanie's absolutely right. The base is different. It's got different expectations, and Kenney failed to meet those expectations. So that explains a lot of why he is where he's at today. And whereas Doug Ford, I think, benefited from a population that was more open, even though he flip-flopped an awful lot during the pandemic. He went back and forth and infuriated parents in particular. But I think the point's been made that people want to put that in the rearview mirror, and they did give him a decent grade, at least compared to Jason Kenney.
Andrew, I wonder, we talk about, people want to look forward. And I think back to the final debate, provincial leaders debate. And it just seemed, other than Mike Schreiner, nobody could really get a hand on him. Did you see that, or did you get that?
Yeah, I think the leaders really struggled to sort of lay that body blow, that really significant blow on the premier. Andrea Horvath, I think, had some good moments, but I think the problem for her is, one, this is her, fourth round of leader debates. And I think some of her stronger points were kind of rehashing the pandemic, what went wrong and calling in the army. And I think, again, I just don't think that the public is that Premier Ford was able to, and I give him credit throughout the pandemic. I always thought he did well. When he was wrong, when he made a mistake, when things didn't go well, he owned up to it. Mm. And I think that served him well. It serves him well now when he stands there and says, I didn't do the best I could. We're learning from it. And our goal is to be better and move forward. That there's an audience for that kind of pivot and that kind of message.
Tasha, we talk about that debate, and I thought, there was a lot of body blows that were left unsaid, except for Mike Schreiner, and he is in there and he's digging for a second seat there for the Green Party. Do you think it's a possibility they'll get that second seat on Thursday?
I don't know. I'm not a pollster, and so I can't really drill down to the numbers that they're expecting. But my sense of it is that people are looking at this election, and if the Green Party is a place, and the last polling I saw, I think they're at 6%. So not I don't know how that splits out, like I said, but not significant enough to get them any major representation beyond what they have now, probably. And I think people. Unfortunately, in Canada, the Green Party has never had the traction it's had for it in Europe, for example, where people look at it as a serious option. Here, it's kind of if we're really unhappy with everybody else, almost a protest vote in some senses. It hasn't defined itself either, I think, as fully as the Greens in Europe, who really had a very strong political agenda also beyond environmentalism. I mean, here people think, well, I can get environmental agendas with all the other parties too. So if I like one of theirs, and it's not a defining issue the way that it was the height of the Green movement overseas. So I think that maybe they missed that boat here in a way. And I mean, to his credit, yeah, Schreiner was very good in the debates, no question. But I don't think that will necessarily translate to enough support to get them, like I said, major representation. And Stephanie wants that.
If I can
Sure.
jump in. I think the Greens have this one window of opportunity in Parry Sound Muskoka because the Liberal candidate had to be dropped. And so they were possibly second or third in some people's minds. And so there might be a possibility here for that reason that the Green candidate can swing through. And that would be a huge boon for Mike Schreiner, for sure, not to be alone anymore in the legislature. But I'm not sure that's entirely the Green Party's doing. I think they're just benefiting from that opportunity there.
Well, you take advantage of your opportunities, do you not?
You have to.
yeah, especially in politics, and with a few days left in the election campaign. All right, let's do some predictions here, Andrew. What do you think is going to be the result on Thursday evening here in Ontario?
Well, I would say Doug Ford will cruise to another healthy majority. I think there's a chance that he gets somewhere in around the 75 to 80 seats is possible for Premier Ford. And the race for second and third, as someone said, is very interesting. I picked up a little bit some faltering on the Liberal side and a little bit of pickup on the NDP. So it'll be very interesting to see what the last polls show. But I think that race for second and third will be very close. Some very, very close ridings, I believe, in some of the regions with these three-way splits and how they unfold. It'll be very important for the ground games of those parties to see who has got the work done to bring a riding home.
Okay, Marvin, what do you think the results on Thursday evening?
So I'm going to be a little less generous than Andrew. I still think it's a Conservative majority. I think more in the 74 seat range, with the Liberals and the NDP maybe splitting around 48 seats, and then Schreiner showing up, and then one other. Now, you mentioned the race in Muskoka. We have one here in Hamilton where the sitting NDP candidate was not allowed to run as an NDP, so he's running as an independent. There's also a very popular Liberal and a very popular Conservative. So again, depending upon how that splits, you could even have one independent joining the ranks. But it really is the race for second, possibly tied, the Liberals and the NDP. And if that's the case, I don't know who's the opposition leader.
I guess they flip a coin. Tasha, your prediction?
I'm kind of going to split the difference. I think between 70 and 75 seats for the Tories. And with regards to the splits, it's very, very difficult to predict who, what, where for the other parties. I think it will come down to the ground game. And that's, again, it's a local thing. You have enough of a team to get out your vote, you have a better shot. And if not, well, you're probably going to be sitting at home.
And Stephanie, what's your prediction for Thursday evening?
I'm going to go with the family here. I think we're all seeing sort of the same thing. So I think the PCs will be as comfortable in Queen's Park after June 2nd as they were at dissolution of the Ledge. I'm predicting the Liberals will be doing better than last time, which wouldn't be too much of a record.
Not much.
So I'm predicting between.
Way to go out on a limb, Stephanie. Way
I
to
know,
go
right?
out on a
Yeah,
limb.
exactly. So between 18 and 20 seats, perhaps, for the Liberals. I'm going to say 2 for the Greens and the rest for the NDP. So I do predict that Andrea Horvath will remain the official opposition leader. But for how long?
Yeah, that's what, how many times can you be second or third, right, before you have to go in another direction?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, folks, I want to thank our guest today on Unpublished TV, Andrew Enns, Executive Vice President at Leger 360, Marvin Ryder, Associate Professor at the DeGroote School of Business at McMaster University, Tasha Carradine is a Principal at Navigator, and Stephanie Schwinnard, Assistant Professor, Political Science at Queen's University. Now, Election Day is June 2nd. Make sure you get out and vote. Thanks for watching Unpublished TV. Stay safe. I'm Ed Hand.